Hi, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about experiencing, expressing, and reading emotions in others. This is a continuation of Unit 4. The focus today is on modules 4.8, A and B.
So we're going to first talk about experiencing emotion. And there are three theories that explain how we experience emotions such as happiness, sadness, fear, etc. So there's the James-Lange, Cannon-Bard, and Schachtner-Singer two-factor theory. So look at the James-Lange theory. James-Lange believes that there needs to be some sort of physiological response or arousal that has to occur before we can experience an emotion. So we have to have a situation happen. So an oncoming car is coming towards you. From that oncoming car, you are going to have a physiological response, such as a pounding heart rate, some sort of arousal that's going to occur. Because of that pounding heart rate, you are then able to experience the emotion of fear. So he thought you had to cry to feel sadness. You have to smile to feel happiness. You have to have butterflies in your stomach to feel nervous. You have to have some sort of physiological response in order to experience an emotion. In studying James-Lange's theory and seeing if there's any credibility to that, there have been studies done on what's called the facial feedback hypothesis. And the facial feedback hypothesis basically has individuals force them to make certain facial expressions, whether that be one of sadness, like you see on the left, sadness, or you might interpret that as anger. And on the right, you see that person's facial expression is happiness. And some of the experiments they've done is they've had those individuals reading cartoons or listening to something funny. And then they wanted to find out how funny did that person interpret those cartoons to be. And they found over and over in study after study that those that were forced into the facial expression of a smile actually rated more happiness or fun while they were looking at the cartoons, rated that they liked the cartoons more than those who had the facial expression, the more negative facial expression. They've also done research where they took individuals who were experiencing depression, and they gave those individuals Botox to paralyze the facial muscles that allow you to frown. So it essentially prevented them from frowning during that period of time. And they found that 9 out of 10 individuals, or 90% of their participants who got this Botox, experienced lessened symptoms of depression as compared to their control group counterparts. So there is some truth to this theory, at least what research tells us. A second theory about how we experience emotions is called the Cannon-Bard theory. And I remember the Cannon-Bard as they can happen at the same time. Cannon-Bard, they can happen at the same time. And according to Cannon-Bard, he thought that physiological arousal and emotions occur simultaneously. They happen together. They are not dependent on one another. Therefore, you experience butterflies in your stomach at the same time you feel nervous. You experience an increased heart rate at the same time you feel excited. You experience, you are smiling at the same time you are happy. That they do not depend on one another. And this perspective, or this theory, would say that you could experience emotions without having a physiological response. So if you are an individual who's paraplegic and perhaps can't feel certain physiological responses, according to the Cannon-Bard theory, that individual can still experience emotions. So Cannon-Bard, they can happen together. A third theory is called the Schachtner-Singer two-factor theory. And I just remember this by two factors lead to one. Two factors lead to one. So you have some sort of stimulus where you see a snake, or we could use the same examples from earlier where you see a oncoming car coming. And once that stimulus is there, we have some sort of physiological response happening. We have a heart pounding, we are shaking, we have butterflies in our stomach, we have tears. Whatever physiological response we have a physiological response. At that same time that we have that physiological response, we also give it a cognitive label. So we look around and we say, oh my gosh, this is a scary situation. The snake is about to bite me. Because we've cognitively recognized what's happening around us and labeled our emotion, we then experience the emotion of fear or whatever it might be. This theory does a nice job of explaining how the same physiological responses can yield multiple emotions. For example, take myself and maybe my husband to an airplane and tell us we're going to jump out and go skydiving. We're both going to probably experience the same physiological responses. We're both going to probably have an increased heart rate. We're both going to probably have a pit in our stomach. We both might be trembling. But me, I'm going to look around and say, holy cow, I'm about to jump to my death. I'm scared and I'm going to experience fear. And my husband's going to say, holy cow, this is going to be the coolest thing in my world. And look around and say, this is awesome. I'm excited. And he's going to experience excitement. Same physiological responses, same physiological reactions in our body, but it's dependent on how we label why we're having those physiological responses. That's going to depend on the emotion that we're going to experience. Moving on to how do we express and read emotions in others. Kind of a key figure in this portion of the video is a man named Paul Ekman. And Paul Ekman is famous for his research on facial expressions across cultures and what's going to be called microexpressions that we're going to be talking about later in this film. But what he did is that he went to people of all different cultures and he showed them facial expressions of happiness, sadness, fear, anger. I can't remember the other emotions, but you can look to the right at the picture and see all the different emotions that he showed individuals across many different cultures. And he asked them to identify or match the emotion with the facial expression. And what he found is that the cultures, most cultures, or all cultures, were able to have a universal recognition of most of these facial expressions, such as happiness, fear, anger. It was universal. Happiness looks the same in our culture versus another culture. So then he extended his research and he went to a group of individuals who are kind of in Papua New Guinea that are not a part of more mainstream culture like we see today, and wanted to see, does the same results happen there as well? And he found that absolutely it did. This culture that is not embedded with other cultures or experiences other cultures had the same exact way of labeling happiness, sadness, fear. So the expression of emotions is pretty similar across different cultures. In fact, they even find infants and individuals who are blind experience or show the same facial expressions for emotions. So these are pretty universal. So we found humans share a common set of emotional expressions for happiness, for sadness, for fear, for anger. But where we do see a difference in the cultures is how they display these emotions, when they display these, or these are called display rules. So I'm going to take a look at this clip because I think it does a nice job of giving an example of display rules. So take a listen.
When the minister tripped and fell as he was approaching the podium at the funeral, a majority of attendees thought it was pretty funny. But given the somber situation and the fact that the minister was probably humiliated, nobody laughed. This is an example of emotional display rules in play. Emotional display rules in psychology are cultural rules and etiquette for how, when, and where to express or not express certain emotions. Failing to follow emotional rules can lead others to possibly judge or be concerned for you. Following emotional rules can be a little exhausting and it sometimes feels like work. For example, many feel like they need to express extreme happiness on their wedding day to demonstrate to everyone that they are thrilled with their decision to commit to their significant other. Or they feel like they should cry to show sensitivity and emotional connection when their soon-to-be husband or wife reads their heartwarming vows. They feel that if they don't display these expected emotions, others will judge them for being doubtful or inauthentic. Or worse, that others will be concerned for the health of the relationship or future of the marriage. This may be a reason married couples are often emotionally exhausted at the end of their wedding day and ready for that honeymoon.
So I think this video does a nice job of talking about display rules and giving examples of them. But display rules essentially are across different cultures. There are different rules as to how and when we show emotion, whether that's how we show affection, when we use certain gestures, what is an appropriate greeting, what is an appropriate way to express love to your children. Each culture has their own said and unsaid expectations for how and when you display emotions. Something else that's pretty important in this emotion section is with regards to nonverbal communication. 90% of the emotions that we express is nonverbal. Across all cultures, 90% is nonverbal. So nonverbal communication can do one of three things. One, it can repeat your verbal communication. So if you say, I'm having a great day, and you're smiling at the same time, those two things match. Nonverbal communication can also substitute. So somebody might say, how you doing today? And you might smile and give them a thumbs up, where you don't even have to verbally communicate. The nonverbal communication of the smiling and of the thumbs up are indicators of how you're feeling. Nonverbal communication can also contradict, and this is where it's so important to be, very good at interpreting what are people saying beyond what they're saying. So somebody might ask, how are you doing today? And you might say, I'm fine. And you might have a gruff look on your face, or you might cross your arms. Well, that would be a contradiction. Clearly, what I'm seeing in your body language or in your nonverbal communication is not matching what you're saying, which is, I'm fine. Here's some examples. You can look at these pictures and you can interpret a lot about what you see in these pictures. You can interpret who looks bored, who's trying to be powerful, who is angry, who is frustrated, who might be exhausted. So the nonverbal communication can be a very powerful way of communicating with somebody else. This is where we go back to a man named, that same man, Paul Ekman, and where he has then extended his research to what's called microexpressions. And these are facial expressions that only last for a moment, that show an emotion that an individual is trying to hide. So if you are able to notice split-second facial expressions in an individual, even or especially when they are trying to hide an emotion, you can tell essentially if a person is lying, or you can tell how a person actually feels. No matter how good they are at covering up how they feel, these microexpressions come through. And we're going to focus on these microexpressions more in class, but having that general idea of a microexpression going into class is really important. So it's a very short 1 to 2 second facial expression that we have that when we try and hide an emotion, this microexpression doesn't allow us to hide that emotion. So we'll talk more about that in class.